The 1950 World Cup was the first post-World War II finals, and as a result, with every World Cup, it brought with it some incredible anecdotes before the tournament had even begun. It was held in South America for the first time since the inaugural edition in 1930, with Brazil the designated hosts. Germany, as a result of their actions in World War II, were actually banned from the qualification process by FIFA for that edition. And there was also a rumour that India abstained from taking part as they weren't allowed to play in bare feet, although in reality it was simply because they couldn't afford the money for the travel. Bear in mind that travel wasn't at the standard that it is now. Most notably of all, this was the tournament where England finally deigned to FIFA's level, having rejoined football's governing body a few years earlier. They missed a few World Cups despite arguably being the best side in the world at the time, as they were angry about payments to amateur players, which were conducted by FIFA. However, despite their aloofness in thinking that they were still the greatest side on earth, they were humbled in perhaps the biggest shock in World Cup history, as the rank amateurs of the USA beat them 1-0. To put it into context, the USA had lost their last 7 games leading up to that match by a combined score of 45-2. Such was the magnitude of that upset. However, all of those stories, whilst incredible in themselves, are not the ones of the primary focus of today's video. But instead, I'm focusing on perhaps the most prominent example of sporting hubris there has ever been, certainly in a footballing context at the very least. This concerns the final itself, which was to be played between Brazil, who were the hosts of the competition, and Uruguay, who were the first champions of the tournament back in 1930, and how the hopes and dreams of a nation came crashing down, as well as its drastic and horrendous consequences. In case you don't know, South America is football crazy, and no country personifies this quite like Brazil. They are fervent backers of the Seleção wherever they play, and this has been the case throughout their entire history. The team, thankfully, has been able to live up to those expectations, being the only country to qualify for every World Cup tournament since its inception in 1930, and they have won it the most too, with 5 triumphs to date. Perhaps, however, it should have been 6. For a bit of backstory leading up to the final, there were 16 teams who qualified, although 3 withdrew before the tournament began, with 2 of them being in Uruguay's group, meaning that they only had to play 1 game in the first group stage, annihilating Bolivia 8-0 to progress to the next round. Brazil, meanwhile, had a full group of 4, but won 2 and drew 1 to qualify for the next round, playing with an attacking flair and style that one comes to expect from the Brazilian team. This was the only World Cup tournament in history where the final round was a group stage, meaning there was no bona fide showpiece or final event, although as a result of how things transpired, FIFA now officially recognises the match which took place to be the final of the 1950 World Cup. It was a group of 4 teams, with Sweden, Spain and the 2 aforementioned South American powerhouses making up the number. But after the first 2 rounds of matches, it was clear that it was between Brazil and Uruguay for the title. Brazil had prepared for this crunch match by thrashing Sweden 7-1 and Spain 6-1, whereas Uruguay were a bit more unsteady and inconsistent in their 2 matches, drawing 2-2 with the Spaniards but squeaking past the Swedes 3-2 to set up the event. And in case you're interested, Sweden came 3rd. The permutations for the final match were simple. If Brazil avoided defeat, they would be the world champions for the first time in their history, but if Uruguay could cause an upset and beat them, then they would win the Jules Rimet trophy for the 2nd time in their history. Now, you have to remember the importance of this match to Brazil. Not only were they the hosts of the entire competition, but they had been starved of success in the World Cup as a whole, having not won it to this point, so the whole country was expectant of a Brazil success. However, this level of footballing jingoism perhaps reached unparalleled levels, unlike any we've seen before or since in the build-up to the game. Even the English media can't match this. On the day of the game, there were already newspapers commemorating Brazil's inevitable triumph, which only served to instill yet more nationalistic fervour into the psyches of the Brazilian public. There was a song created for the parade which would occur, and 22 medals were apparently created in preparation for what was to come. Even all of this didn't compare to the paean made by the governor of Rio before the game, where the match was to be held, which went as follows, quote, "You, Brazilians, whom I consider victors of the tournament. You players who in less than a few hours will be acclaimed champions by millions of your compatriots. You who have no equals in the terrestrial hemisphere. You who are so superior to every other competitor. You whom I already salute as conquerors." To quote David Goldblatt, you couldn't have scripted it. Uruguay were, as you would expect, the underdogs in this fight. So much so that the president of the Uruguayan FA told them that if they only conceded 4, then their mission would be a success. However, the Brazilian manager was leery of all this patriotism, as he said that the Uruguayans had frequently been the scourges of the Brazilian national team, and that his players may take to the pitch as if it was a friendly game, as opposed to a World Cup final. Pumped up through all of this, the Uruguayan captain, Pereira, instructed his players to urinate on the collection of Brazilian newspapers that he had bought, which showcased the triumph which was inevitably about to occur. showing the fighting spirit present in the squad. No matter to the Brazilian public, they would turn out in their droves to see Brazil finally lift the Jules Rimet trophy for the first time in their history, in their own country. And so it was. On the 16th of July 1950, the Maracanã of Rio was packed to the rafters with baying Brazilian fans, with the official attendance registered at an unsurpassed world record to this day of 199,854 people. And unofficial figures suggested too that the crowd present was around 225,000 and maybe even more. Brazil dominated the first half, siding their way through the Uruguayan defence seemingly at will, with Ademir, the tournament's top scorer, forcing the best chance of the half, which was parried by Maspoli, the Uruguayan goalkeeper, but no goals would arrive. Eventually, the fans finally got their wish, as Friaxa slotted home a 47th minute opener, and now the floodgates would surely open, but then the unthinkable happened. After that goal, it wasn't the Brazilians who were the most energised to put the game to bed, but instead the Uruguayans intending to flip it on its head, and their goal came 20 minutes later through the winger Juan Schiaffino, who kept up his record of scoring in every match of the tournament. Only one player has done so since. He was unmarked and picked up by Alcides Gizia, took a few strides before smashing past the Brazilian goalkeeper Barbosa. Any Brazilian elan had now evaporated, and the Uruguayan winner came 11 minutes from time, as Gizia played a 1-2 with Julio Perez before shooting at the goal, but the shot squirmed under Barbosa's body, and the Uruguayans led 2-1. Waves of Brazilian attacks followed, but the Uruguayan rearguard held firm, and eventually got the win and the trophy that their performance in that game more than merited. The silence was deafening. There was an extreme minority of Uruguay fans present at the stadium that day, as most were waiting for Brazil's triumph, which never came. The event is now widely known as the Maracanazo, or the agony of the Maracanã, a phrase which resurfaced in the wake of Brazil's next great World Cup humiliation, also on home soil, in 2014, after Germany thrashed them 7-1 in Belo Horizonte, thus becoming known as the Minerazo after the stadium in which they lost. It is perhaps the repercussions of this match which are the most damning reflection of Brazil's zeal for the beautiful game. So distraught were the press that the match was barely mentioned in the next day's newspapers, and if it was, then it didn't carry any positivity whatsoever. Pelé recalled the somber mood in his hometown, as though Brazil had lost the war, and one journalist even went so far as calling it a national catastrophe on a similar scale to that of the Hiroshima bombings on Japan, which had occurred 5 years earlier. Some fans even took the decision to commit suicide, unable to take what had just happened. From a footballing standpoint, the Brazilians didn't play another international match for nearly 2 years out of sheer embarrassment, and not again at the Maracanã until 1954. Furthermore, their white kit which they wore for the final was deemed unlucky and never worn again, with the competition being held to determine what the new kit should look like. That kit was a yellow home kit, the one which we still see today. However, the most criminal impact out of all of this was when the scapegoats were picked out by the press, after the silent anger after the game had died down. 3 were singled out as being supposed cowards and lacking discipline, those being the goalkeeper Barbosa, defender Juvenal, and left half Bigode. And in a country deeply torn by racism, it was an indication of just how deep the societal divide was, as all of the 3 mentioned players were black. Barbosa, being the goalkeeper who had let in both the goals and potentially could have done much better with the second one, was the one subject to the most vitriol, with him apparently walking into a baker's shop one day and someone observing to their child that he was the man who had, quote, made all of Brazil cry, close quote. He was seen as a symbol of bad luck and was as a result refused entrance into Brazil's training ground in 1993 or to commentate on one of their games. And no black player would play in goal for Brazil until 1995, when Dida made his first appearance for the Seleção. Barbosa allegedly burnt the goalposts of the Maracanã when he was given them as a present of some kind. I don't know what kind of masochistic incentives the people who gave him the sticks had, to be honest. But he was continuously subject to abuse and opprobrium until his death in poverty 50 years later. He was quoted as saying just before his death, open quotes, "The maximum punishment in Brazil is 30 years imprisonment, but I have been paying for something I'm not even responsible for by now for 50 years, close quote. Lesson learned. Never hype up a national team until it is absolutely confirmed that they have won a tournament or surpassed all kind of national expectations, in order to prevent such national depression as this. That is it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed this telling of sporting hubris, if you like. Please give the video a like, subscribe if you want to see more of this, and comment what you think about this whole situation down in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.